Well, I have a 5 o'clock time, so I want to make that announcement one more time that for those of you who just entered the room, and I'll drop it in the chat as folks continue to log on. We'll get started in a moment, but please know that your questions are welcome for this session. And if you'd like to drop those in the chat box to be read aloud, you might do that. Or if you would prefer to ask your questions directly, you can unmute and ask those at the end. But I think, Pat, we're about ready to get started if you're ready.
Sounds good, Lynn. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce a distinguished global business leader. You're in for a treat, Patti Shields. She's current president and chief omni merchant and global leader of the Grayson Company. Prior to that, she was the acting brand president, executive vice president, and chief merchant for New York and Company, and led that company through the pandemic. She is a member of the School of Business Board of Visitors. She's a guest lecturer in Trinity College in Ireland, the MBA program. She's a co-owner of a 230-year-old Irish pub in B&B. I think, Lynn, the next trip, we just got to go to Ireland and do this from Ireland.
Perfect.
And she's a Wake Forest graduate, but more importantly, she embodies pro humanitate. I mean, she's not only a business leader, she is a community leader, and she serves the greater good. So she is an outstanding leader and role model for all of us. And Patti, it is an honor for you to take your time and share your wisdom with us. So welcome, and the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. So welcome. Thank you all for joining this this Monday evening or late at night, depending on where in the world you are. And Pat, thank you for the opportunity. Lynn and Colleen as well. It's always an honor for me to be asked to speak to current Wake Forest students. As Pat said, I'm a very proud Wake Forest University graduate. I graduated in 1990 with the compelling art history degree, but obviously have used that and would argue that, a Wake Forest education gives you a platform to do anything in the world. And as my dad was concerned about my career options, saying I was way too loud to work in a museum, it was never my intent to work in a museum. My goal was always to take the broad base of learning that I was able to be exposed to at Wake Forest, and left Wake Forest and joined the executive training program at Macy's because the retail bug bit me early. And that is where I've spent the last 35 plus years of my career. The best thing about retail, and I'll put in a plug for all of you out there considering retail or any consumer product kind of line of work, is that I don't think you do the same thing 2 days in a row ever, because your customer is always changing, your base of business is always changing. And I've had the privilege of working for some of the world's greatest brands. I worked and cut my teeth, like I said, at Macy's in their training program. I worked at Gap, Victoria's Secret. In luxury, I worked at St. John Knits. I worked at Charlotte Russe back when junior fast fashion was just emerging. And as Pat said, I was the acting brand president and chief merchant for New York and Company, most recently during COVID-19. So I'm happy to speak about any of those companies or my background. I invite you all to stalk me on LinkedIn and my connections, because if I can be a network between you and someone that you're looking to contact in any industry that I'm connected with them, I'm more than happy to do so, especially because you have the Wake Forest connection as well. So yeah, I have been in the retail business for a long time. And I think when I spoke with Pat, Colleen, and Lynn 2 weeks ago when we were discussing what I was going to speak about tonight, we wanted to leave this a very open forum. So please know that after I ramble on for a while, I am going to open the floor and happy to take your questions, about, career pathing and leadership, managing during COVID-19, my thoughts in the world of retail and consumerism. So please jot your questions down because we will be allowing time at the end for that. And I really view these sessions as kind of one of the benefits, I think, in the evolution of the business school at Wake Forest, is that they're investing a lot of time in bringing, current business leaders to you. And I want to be as available to you as possible. I think that is probably a great way to understand, how some of the things that you're learning in theory are being put into practice. And, as Pat says, I think Pro Humanitate is such an important part of the Wake Forest platform. Doing business the right way and leading the right way is something that, hopefully you will take from this experience at Wake Forest throughout your career. Because I will tell you, when things get difficult, as they did in COVID-19, your credibility and your integrity are really all you have to help you navigate through some very difficult times in business. And I have to say, I've always learned to kind of have that Pro Humanitate hat on. And it certainly benefited, steering, the company that I was leading during a very difficult time. I thought I would start out just, with a couple, philosophical comments. And then I will also, maybe throw it out for some early questions, and maybe that'll lead me down a couple more stories. But obviously, like, the world of business is changing. We've found ourselves in a very globalized, world, more so since COVID, that, the barriers to doing business, whether it be on e-commerce, look at the likes of Zoom. I think the accessibility of everyone around the world has really been transformed by what has happened to us over the last 2 years. So, when you look at the opportunities of, what your education looks like, or if you're an alumni, where your career path is taking you, one of the things I just wanted to talk about was, how do you approach your career and opportunities? I'm kind of more on the backside of my career right now, but a lot of questions I get asked is, gosh, Patti, how did you navigate, your career path to put yourself in a position where you are considered very experienced in leadership? And I think, my dad worked for the same company for 29 years. I think you may have dads or uncles or grandfathers that kind of had that same story. They started here and they kind of meticulously worked their way up the ladder. And fortunately or unfortunately, the dynamics of the business world are less accustomed to that. So you really need to own your own development, your own career path, early on. And I got great advice early on in my career from someone who was a great mentor to me. So point number one is always find a good mentor in the business early on. Find someone who will own you. But anyway, this lesson is something that I take with me today, and I share with you tonight as something that I think is really important, no matter what stage you are in the business. Is that you have to view your career as you're walking through, like you're carrying a toolbox, right? And you don't need a toolbox full of the same tools. You're not going to be able to solve multiple problems if all the tools in the toolbox are like a screwdriver. So you need to look for diversified opportunities. You need to look for, different companies, different experiences, different areas of specialization. Because right now, companies sometimes will pigeonhole you. You might need to look for broader opportunities to build that base, to build your toolbox earlier in your career, not only so you find the right niche or the right place or the right fit for you, but also so that you're able to really understand cross-functionally what other people you will be working most closely with are doing in relation to your own responsibilities. Then as you elevate throughout your career, you might own that area of responsibility at one point, and you'll have that experience to fall back on and really understand. So in retail, when I first started out, I actually first started out in stores. That's where the bug bit me. I loved working with customers. I worked for the Talbots on Coliseum Drive. I think it's still there. And I did work there just self-servingly because they were closed on Sundays because they weren't in the mall, and they also closed at 5 o'clock. So I was still able to go out and have fun at school. But we were the first Talbots to launch Petites in Winston-Salem, in North Carolina. And the people from corporate came down. We had a whole training, and it really exposed me that like life beyond retail existed beyond that store level. And I was really curious about how the people up in Massachusetts at the time were picking the clothes and making the clothes and getting them down to the store and to the customer, knowing that I was representing to the customer what the company was trying to sell. And that to me was I was very curious. And I think that's a very important word as well when you look at, what drives you into a certain field or a certain area of responsibility that you're going to flourish in. If you're super curious about it and you continue to be curious about it, that's probably one of the most important words and attributes that I look for, even when I'm hiring someone. If they're curious about the customer, or curious about, how it works, that's usually a pretty good fit, because that natural curiosity is always going to be that kind of engine that like keeps you going and keeps you motivated and keeps you constantly learning. And even after all this time in retail, I still feel like I'm learning something new. Certainly about the customer and how the world is operating every day. So I think that's super important. But, kind of back to the toolbox, you need to kind of, understand how to build the toolbox. You understand what tools you're really good at using. You want to know what your strengths are in your toolbox, how to leverage those to your advantage. What are the tools that you kind of have, that you're not really sure how they work, but understand that you need to learn how to use those tools differently. And then really understanding, where your opportunities are. I don't like to call them weaknesses, but understanding, where you need to grow, where you need to invest time. And then, there are weaknesses sometimes, or there's some, things that you really may need to invest a little bit more training or, specialization. Or, there might be things that you're just not comfortable with, and just understand and own that. And, as you grow as a leader, I think, really understanding what those opportunities and potential weaknesses are, and, verbalizing them, not just to the people that, are your peers, but the people that work for you. That can give you a lot of credibility. It makes you very, human and accessible to them, as they're trying to understand. I'll give you an example. As I was growing as a leader, and as I'm a leader today, I'm super passionate about what I do, like energy wise. And I come across, I'm a little bit loud. Hopefully I'm not too loud for your Zoom. But I'm super passionate. So I ask questions very directly, very loudly. And I got this feedback a lot 10, even 20 years ago. But as I grew in my roles and responsibilities, I truly began to understand that less people, the higher I got, the less people would ask me questions, right? They would, because they were afraid. They were afraid because I was like so passionate that if they said something a little bit off, or if they said something that, I don't know, that countered something I said, that I wouldn't react well, when that's totally not the case. So I understand that's a weakness of mine. So as I've gone through, what I tend to do now is I leave space for people to talk, or I ask people, especially people who usually have like, I don't know, like a raised eyebrow or a curious face, what do you think about what I'm saying? So I pause and ask questions, because I don't want to create a front where, my passion is denying someone the opportunity to come forward and ask a question, because we all kind of lose with that. I'm not going to change who I am. I'm 53 years old. So I know that I'm not going to get any quieter, and I'm not going to change how I communicate. But what I do is I kind of leave that safe space or ask the questions. So I become a little bit more approachable. And that's something that I've had to do for decades now, just to make sure that I'm getting the best out of the group around me. And that's something that I know I really can't change about myself, doesn't prohibit other people from really approaching that. So that's a permanent thing in my toolbox, is the like, let it breathe, Patti, and ask questions, Patti, because I know that's something I kind of need to overcompensate for. So, I think, really understanding the construction of your toolbox and what you have to compensate for. Like I said, when I rattled off the brands that I worked for, when I started out my career, I really only was in the children's area. I worked in kids, I worked in baby, I was, rose to vice president level, all within the kids world, really. And my president came to me and said, you're going to limit your ability in the future, and you have a great future ahead of you if you just stay in this kind of kids channel. And she said, I would love to put you in a leadership role in men's. And I was like, I almost started crying, because I was like, it wasn't what I knew. I knew I was good at kids. But she said, if you really want to be a leader in the future, you're going to have to show a diversification across a broader spectrum of categories. So I really didn't want to go into men's, especially at Old Navy. But I took her advice. I took the job, and I ended up absolutely loving it. And after that, went into women's. I've done accessories, home. I think once I kind of proved to myself that I didn't have to stay in this kind of narrow focused world, that I really had the tools in my toolkit to really succeed in any category, it gave me the confidence to really move forward. And then it was never in a conversation, going forward about, okay, well, Patti, you really only have kids experience. This is really women's. We're not going to consider you for this role. So again, it's really understanding at every stage of your career how you're putting the pieces together. Letting mentors help you with that, kind of owning what that looks like. And then, you'll be able to figure out as well, what things are missing from your toolbox. So again, as I was building my toolbox, I realized I didn't have experience in the luxury sector. So I went for an opportunity and went to St. John Knits and did luxury. I didn't have, store management experience at the leadership level. I had that at the St. John, the role that I had there. At New York & Company, I took on responsibility for design and then eventually marketing as well. So again, it's just really looking and saying, okay, where can I get more opportunities to really broaden my scope and really, understand, where I can take my career to the next step. So that's really my wisdom in terms of building really a fulfilling career journey, I'll call it. And like I said, I think in a dynamic industry like retail, you have the opportunity, and now with the evolution of e-commerce, there's even more opportunities to really participate in things, with brands and businesses that are not only, profitable, but they're also doing the right thing. They're looking at sustainability, they're looking at, really controlling consumption and, recycling and reusing materials, and really pointing the kind of fast fashion juggernaut into a different cycle, which I think is really exciting to be part of as well. So, with that, I've kind of rambled on for 20 minutes. So I want to go out there and see if there's any questions from the students or the alumni, or any things you want me to kind of talk about that are close to your heart.
So you're welcome to unmute and ask questions directly. I don't see a question in the chat at the moment.
Patty, I have a question for you. If you
Sure.
Sharon, you mentioned that you led the New York company through the pandemic. What's one or two leadership lessons you took? I mean, that had to be scary and everything else to take such a big company through the pandemic. So if you could share that, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. And for those of you that don't know the trajectory, or I'll give you a little bit of background about New York and Company. So New York and Company is a 101-year-old women's specialty company. It was founded as Lerner New York and rebranded as New York and Company in the early 2000s. At the point that I joined the company in 2017 as the Chief Merchandising Officer, we were doing just shy of $1 billion in sales with a little over, gosh, well, at the point that we were closing stores, it was 200 and yeah, it was 244 stores. So, you know, we definitely were a large women's specialty player. However, you know, what ended up happening during COVID was about 2/3 of our store volume, or our volume, was driven out of our stores, which obviously we closed them the third week of March. So we lost about 2/3 of our volume during that time. We pivoted to our e-commerce. However, it was a really difficult time. We had to furlough all of our store employees. We had to furlough about 80% of our home office employees. And because we weren't able to open stores really until, I think we started opening stores the second week of June, it ended up putting the company, we had to declare bankruptcy on July 13th of 2020. So, you know, obviously, I think, you know, one of the big leadership lessons that I learned as being part of the leadership team during that time was just how important being very upfront and honest, you know, is when you're dealing in a period of uncertainty. And like I said, you know, I think, you know, doing things the right way and with integrity is super important. And I was lucky I was part of a leadership team that felt the same way. So as we guided the company through the furloughs and eventual layoffs, you know, we were very honest with them about the, the unfortunate situation where it looked like we were going to be closing all of our stores, which we ended up doing, and the eventual position where we were going to sell the digital assets of the company to a new owner. So, you know, because we were a publicly traded company, you know, there are things you can say and things you can't say, but we were very, very upfront and honest with our investors as well as our employees about kind of where things were going in the process. The good news is that we were able to really drive the e-commerce business with stores being closed. So we became a very viable target for sale, which was very good. And we were able to sell the assets of the company to new ownership in August of 2020, and they took ownership on October 1st. So, you know, and again, leading through that, part of the asset that the company who acquired us was looking at was the talent in the company. We had our own design team. We had, you know, certainly the 20% of the people left in the home office were doing like Herculean work because we had lost such a huge chunk of other people. And it would have been impossible to sell the company had those employees not stayed on. So really finding ways to motivate people, to keep them engaged with the brand and the future, and dedicated to a customer that literally had stayed, you know, very loyal to us, especially on e-commerce, was super important. So, you know, Pat, I'd say that the two most important things for me was really, leading with integrity, keeping communication open. And I had a 9:30 call every single day from the first day we started working remotely until, the 9:30 call still exists, even though I left the company at the end of the transition on December 31st. But really, and the end of the 9:30 call was, what questions do you have for the leadership team? And we would stay on. If we needed to stay on an hour, we'd stay on an hour. We needed to stay on 5 minutes. I think having that accessibility and that transparency was really the most important thing that kept the company going through. And I'm super proud to say they've had a fantastic spring season. They're getting ready for fall. And, other than a few of us in the high leadership positions that elected to leave, most of the team is still intact. So I'm really happy about that.
Patty, thank you. Would you mind following up? How did you engage with the key external stakeholders? You mentioned the investor, the suppliers, and everybody else that was critical for your company.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of, some of it was controlled. Obviously, from an investor standpoint, we engaged with, external legal counsel as well to make sure that we were kind of following all the letters of the law while being as transparent as possible. For our suppliers, who obviously we needed to keep supplying us, or if we wouldn't have been able to keep the business running, that would have wiped all potential bidders away. Again, it was kind of a weekly thing. So it was kind of like I had my 9:30 daily call with the OWN team, and we had weekly calls with the suppliers, and we were literally available on demand, just keeping them abreast as to, what the plans were as we were going through, the bidding process for the company, letting them know, what was working within the business as well, sharing with them the success that we were seeing, so they knew we were definitely building momentum, was all really, really super important. And again, I think it was almost over communication, and really showing a willingness to be accessible at all times if they had a question. I think it was easier for them once we filed for bankruptcy. They knew at that point they would be guaranteed paid. So it was a little bit easier. But they all wanted, to be, part of the go forward entity. So that was also helpful as well. We actually even had 2 of our suppliers bid for the company, which was very flattering. They ended up not winning, but seeing their faith in us as an ongoing entity was certainly, that was confidence building at that point.
Thank you.
So Patty, Oscar has this question. How do you see the shift from full-time employees to independent contractor based on the spreading popularity of home-based work?
Yeah, it's super interesting, because if someone would have told me that I would have been able to concept, design, and deliver product with a design team, a merchant team, and a sourcing team all virtually, I would have said that's not possible. But I think there's definitely a hybrid situation in the future. I think there's definitely been advancements in technology that were kind of slow to take up on the retail side, in all fairness. We've had technology to do remote fittings with China for years, and we've elected not to do it. We were kind of forced to do that through COVID. So I think companies need to be really open to that. That said, we did run a fortune in FedEx boxes, because if you can imagine, we're merchants. We like to touch things. We like to feel things. I like to see how things look on a real human being as well. So, there are some benefits for being in person. But I think the reality of everyone, sitting, hours in the same place at the same time seems very, very archaic. So I think there's an expectation, and I also think it's generational as well, because I think I certainly know the younger members of my team certainly have embraced technology even quicker, and their expectation is that there is more of a hybrid work model going forward. And I think employers need to be open to that, or they're going to lose viable talent. Because I think, things are becoming table stakes. Sustainability is table stakes. And I think this hybrid work model and this notion that you have to be in the office, space time, and kind of all these like horror stories of the past make us sound really old and tired. And I think there's an efficiency and there's a balance that I think can be gained. And I also think there's an entire businesses that are now platformed off, on the retail side, that are platformed off digital data and technology. And there's not the same level of kind of product intensity that there has been in the past. And whether that's good or bad can be debated, because I do think there's something about, product quality that matters. But I think people have to be more open to that model. And whether they're independently contracted or whether they're full-time employees of the company, I just know from talking to my friends in the business in both New York and LA especially, is that the expectation of being in an office 5 days a week is just it's kind of going away. But to that point, if it gives you more time to be creative, find inspiration, researching where the customer is going. I think, the retail world and the whole consumer world is trying to find a good hybrid between product and experience. Retail needs to be experiential, and it needs to be consistent with the brand experience online. It needs to be consistent with the brand equity and the brand promise that you're putting out there in your product. So, I think there's a huge opportunity for business to benefit from the fact that you're not just stuck within those four walls of your office every day. If you're out there looking at what your customer is doing and where they're going, you're probably going to get more ideas about where the next, great product or great business idea is coming from. So I think there's a lot to benefit from that as well.
Thank you.
Gosh, this is a quiet group. Am I scaring you? No. Any words of wisdom that you want on anything?
I've got a quick question.
Sure.
I saw that you've got some history in supply chain as well. Let me know if this is outside your purview. But given the current circumstances and supply chain challenges, do you see any companies going from more of a just-in-time inventory to holding more inventory on hand moving forward, or even with customer retention and losing some of your customer satisfaction just to slower deliveries, people changing brand loyalty to out of convenience?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point right now, because some of the supply chain challenges are literally all logistical, right? It's getting it from point A to point B, because there's been kind of an explosion. And I'll talk in the retail side a little bit, Lucas. But, as the economy of China started ramping up, as they recovered from COVID before us, the domestic market there got super, super hot. The US market was still very tentative. And a lot of the factory capacities ended up being eaten up by the domestic supply chain for China. And then there's this like labor shortage associated with all these container movements between China and the US. And so things can be produced, but they're not necessarily able to get, from the part of the world that they're manufactured in, you know, to the United States especially. And it's cost prohibitive right now. There are less flights, but if you fly anything, it's literally 8 to 10 times more expensive than it was pre-COVID. So there is kind of this, you know, cost of logistics. And then there's also kind of the greening of supply chain, that like people are also looking at how you're getting things from point A to point B. You know, a lot of promises of deliveries being carbon neutral. So there's a lot of pressure right now on supply chain and logistics. I think honestly, and this is more my opinion, is because there's so much data being collected and the world is moving more towards omni and e-commerce, that AI is going to help fuel the processing of demand. So consumer behavior, where you're clicking, what you're looking at, whether you convert to a sale or not, is going to be interpreted in this AI black box. And that is going to give insight on demand that helps inform production. And I do think that overall, there is going to be a pullback on production, because I think there's just a lot of pressure on retailers, on manufacturers, to stop this overproduction. You know, I go back to, you know, 3 years ago when like H&M had like a terrible season and they literally like sold tons of unsold product to like a power plant in Sweden to have it burned into like fuel. Like, you know, that was not good. And you take a look at some of the public pressure on overproduction right now, and movies of landfills of fast fashion clothes. I just think in the retail side anyway, there's definitely going to be a balancing out and kind of a pullback of what that production looks like. And I think it's environmentally, driven, but I also think that people are going to get a lot smarter about how to read demand based off of consumer behavior that is now overly shifting. Even if the purchase isn't made on e-commerce, a lot of that behavior, they're doing product investigation online before they're even buying it in store. I just think the world is going to be moving a little bit, you know, more towards that type of model. And I don't know how the logistics piece is going to be figured out. It really is a challenge. We're moving to Ireland next week, and we lost one of our moving containers because there's a container shortage on the East Coast. So it got pushed out another week because the container doesn't exist. There are not enough boats coming in with product to turn around. And certainly moves are ranked below saleable product. So, you know, I even experienced it trying to get the logistics done for our move this month. So it's a problem, and it's the logistics issue has been out there for over a year now. It really started at the beginning of COVID, and it really hasn't straightened itself out at all. And there's not enough workers in the ports of LA, the ports of Newark, to unload the containers as well. So part of it has to do with the kind of a workforce labor shortage for those jobs as well in the US. So it's going to be around for, you know, at least they're saying through holiday, at least through holiday. So a very good question. And I don't think there's anyone out there with the solution, but I think ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to get smarter about demand, and production overall will hopefully be right-sized.
Some great insights. Thank you.
Oh, I just saw Colleen's. I don't think I got the whole question. Can you speak to the type of work? Okay. Can I speak to the type of work I'm doing with Grayson, and how do I expect that to evolve, and what challenges are as the world continues to change and readjust? Yeah, so I'm super excited. You know, like I just said, I'm moving back to Ireland next week. We have lived in the States now about 5 years. We moved back in 2016 after living in Ireland for 6 years. My husband was the chief financial officer of Primark, which is a value retailer in Europe that started coming to the US a couple of years ago and has a handful of stores over here. So the work I'm doing with Grayson, besides probably some project work direct with retailers looking to enter and expand in the US market, is I'm going to be doing some direct work with Enterprise Ireland, which is actually basically the Irish government has a VC fund where they are investing in Irish brands. They have 40 offices worldwide, but obviously their most important market is North America, so Canada and the US. And I'm working with them right now on bringing some of their most compelling brands to the US market in either a DTC way or by making brand introductions to some of the big US retailers that are in some of the spaces that they're looking at. So super exciting stuff. There are some brands in Ireland, and especially if you know retail and digital marketing and content, you're always looking for a good story, and you're always looking for great, a great way to showcase product. And some of these brands are amazing. One of them is a candle company that was founded in 1411, if you can imagine, so pre-Christopher Columbus. They make candles in the same factory that they did in 1411. And this is back in the era where like candles lit the streets of Dublin. So they had the contract to light the candles in the streets of Dublin for like 200 or 300 years. And they're making candles in the same way that they did then. So they are looking to kind of enter the candle market, which obviously has been one of those, the home business, including candles, like weighted blankets, exploded during COVID. So they are looking to make an introduction to the US market. So we are, kind of hooking them up with some really big US specialty retailers right now. There's also a great handmade soap company that is powered by the River Boyne in Ireland. It is a repurposed linen factory that the founders went in and literally took the big wagon wheel of water that used to power the linen factory. They're using it to make soap. And across the street from the factory is this field of flowers that they pick from and press in the soap. And if you took a look at the factory, like I've traveled around the world and I've seen a lot of factories. This is the most beautiful factory I've ever seen in my life. It's like on a river, it's stone, field of flowers. And again, they currently actually are doing business with Ulta online. Their name is the Handmade Soap Company, and they're looking to get an exclusive contract with some of their super sustainable product with one of the clean beauty retailers, and we're helping introduce them there. So kind of the fun part for me is I get to play a little bit with some of these fantastic heritage Irish brands and bring them into the US market that I know a lot about. So that's one of the big projects I'm kind of leading off with Grayson that I'm super excited and passionate about, because they're also companies doing things really cleanly and sustainably, and they're in areas of the business like clean beauty and home that are really blowing up right now, with really exciting. So that is what I'm doing right now. Anything else?
Patty, do you mind? I want to build on Lucas's question, and he talks supply chain. Now there's more scrutiny on companies. How did you, when you were managing supply chain and running companies, how did you ensure that the people that were supplying product to you maintained ethics as far as labor and the quality materials that went into the products?
Yeah, and we had a sustainable line at New York and Company as well. And you know, there's kind of there's obviously there's auditing. The most important thing, although we had long-term agent and direct to factory relationships that we would go over and our teams would go over and visit. You still would have to do, periodic, auditing as well, independent auditing, just to make sure everything, was lining up with, what they were saying, that nothing was being subcontracted, that things were being produced, where they say they were being produced. And especially with the sustainable line, that they were being manufactured under all the conditions, that we were certifying them. So if it was organic cotton, that we were looking, all the way back to the certification of the raw materials. So, it's become an even more important part of the business than it was before. And Pat, I think I spoke earlier this year to one of your classes about, when I worked for Gap, we would visit and do, we would, visit factories as well to make sure that, the products were made and subcontracted. Not to say that it's flawless. And I think that's one of the things I brought up in class. Like, we believed that this anorak was being made, in a factory with the zippers that we had contracted them to be made with, and the anoraks were delivered, and as part of random testing that is done by the U.S. government, this anorak that came in, a kid's anorak, was found to have lead in the zipper, which is probably one of the worst things you could have found in a child's product. And, we ended up having to make a very public recall. It was, I wasn't on Good Morning America, but the Gap sure was, making notice of the recall. It was literally hundreds of thousands of units internationally that had to be recalled as part of that. And that was back in the late 90s. And I have to say, Gap took that very seriously and really introduced a much more rigorous, testing and auditing protocol that I think they've only built on till today. So, I think it's just super important that people stay close to supply chain. There's different certifications now, like companies that are going for B Corp certification. That's a long process, and you have to have a fully transparent supply chain to do that. It takes literally 2.5 years to certify yourself as a B Corp. So probably a brand you would know, Athleta, which is one of the Gap brands, is a certified B Corp. The transparency that exists in those supply chains for B Corp, I probably see in the next 4 to 5 years that consumers are going to want that level of transparency for most companies, close to that degree, if not to that same degree. So it's really important, but it becomes almost, it's a job in itself, both internally, and then you have to take in external partners that are on the ground to really audit and make sure that all of those rules are being followed. But it's super, super complex.
Thank you.
It's a really quiet group.
Pat, if you don't mind, I had one other question. If you had to go back and give your mid-career selves, say you were in an MBA program, what advice would you give leaders that are in the MBA program?
Gosh. Well, first of all, I know it's an investment to go back and get your executive MBA. And it's something that I did not do, but my husband did, actually, not from Wake Forest. He got his from Marshall in Southern California. I think, I think knowing the curriculum and kind of the entrepreneurial experience that, and thought that Wake Forest drives, you know, I would use what you're learning, within this experience to its fullest. So use it as an opportunity to network, use it as an opportunity to, build a broader foundation and really understand and experiment with things maybe in class that you wouldn't necessarily do in your career. So, if you're in the medical field, for example, maybe look at things in retail or something, so you kind of get an understanding of what things or how things operate in an industry that's not like yours, but might have application down the road as more things synergize, or they might have more advanced technologies to look at. I just remember when my husband was in school, he was in retail, he did a bit in renewable energy, but one of their group projects was on Genentech. And so he learned a lot about the government and lobbying, as well as like technology in the whole pharma industry. I just remember, like, he brings that up in the context of some of his current work, which is still more retail related. And I just think using, your experience as a student to really broaden your horizons is super important. And then I can't emphasize enough, so many opportunities are just created by putting yourself out there and using the network that's given to you. So, I wholeheartely say, like, reach out to me. If there's someone I know that you want to know, I'm happy to connect you. Like I said, the world is a really small place now. And, I think sometimes it all starts with a conversation. And, there's something about that Wake Forest connection that people return your calls. Like people will give you the little bit of a nod. So I would definitely use that to your advantage. But, if you're in the middle of your career and you're not, and I don't know, I never experienced this because I've always loved retail and I've been super curious about it. But I do believe, and I do know people who've kind of like fallen out of love with what they were doing. They're just finance. They don't want to do the debits and credits anymore. Find something you're really curious about and you're really interested in, and figure out how to apply what you're learning and what you like to do, in an area that you're really interested in. And it's just going to work. I was really lucky. I found retail, or retail found me early on in my career, but we all work too long and we work too hard. If you don't love it, find something you love, because then it's really not work. It becomes this like journey that you keep going on, and and it evolves into itself. Like if someone would have even told me, oh, Patti, you're gonna move back to Ireland, you're gonna be consulting after the crazy year I've been through, even 10, 15 years ago, I would have said that sounds like nuts. But I feel like a kid in the candy store right now, like playing with these little brands that are doing, they're doing really small business. I just came from $1 billion company, and they're looking to make their first million, but it's so exciting to see their hunger and to take what I've learned and not scare them with it, but apply it and just say, like, listen, like there are things that are similar, there are things that are different, but there's definite opportunity. And to me, that's the excitement.
Patti, what has your experience been like as part of the board of visitors? And can you share, any topics or things that you all are really exploring and looking at when it comes to the School of Business?
Yeah, I think the most exciting, I just had a conversation a couple weeks ago with Michelle, and I think one of the most exciting things that I spoke about with her, because like I said, I'm not a traditional, um, you know, I didn't graduate from the undergraduate business school, although I did take classes there. Um, for me, I think one of the things that we talked about, because there's a limited number, especially of undergrad students that can graduate with a business degree at Wake Forest, is how to provide some of the opportunities to participate in a business foundational education, even with a non-traditional business degree. So, how do you get, a journalism, major, or an art history major, or an English major, some foundational classes that would lend to their success in a future business environment. Say they took a more entrepreneurial path, or they found something that was a little bit closer tied to their degree. And I think that's something super interesting and super, that I'm super excited about, because like I said, when I told my dad I wasn't going to be a business major, I was going to major in art history, and he had a heart attack almost. I said the most important thing is I graduate with this amazing, educational experience, and I do what I love, and the rest of it will figure itself out. And I think having students exposed to some of the great assets of the business school, and again, building that network of potential, classmates and future touch points for them as they pursue maybe a non-traditional route to business, I think is something I'm really excited about. And I know Michelle wants me to work with the Board of Visitors on. But I think overall, one thing I would celebrate, as being part of a school like Wake Forest is, I think, there's a lot of very active business people on the Board of Visitors. And I think, we're constantly challenging, the leadership at the school, and they embrace the challenges, is to really figure out how to kind of stay ahead. It's a smaller school, we can be nimble, we can embrace kind of the spirit of entrepreneurialism, and really, chase the opportunity to really, bring more real life experiences into the classroom. And I think that's something that, the school is super, super passionate about. And I think, the school knows the importance of data analytics, and, continuing to go from strength to strength there, I think is going to be something that's a priority as well. But I'm super excited, and and I also said there's a number of classes that I took outside of the School of Business that I found to be super consumer facing friendly. So I remember sociology of work was one of my favorite classes at Wake, as well as cultural anthropology. And for a long time, my headline on my LinkedIn page was that I was a retail cultural anthropologist. Because if you consider my customers are my tribe, and I'm trying to find out what inspires them, and anticipate their hunting and gathering patterns, it might not be for food, but it's for the latest fashion. So I found that to be very compelling. So I think there's an opportunity to really blend, between the college and the School of Business, to benefit all populations of students at Wake.
Patty, I want to be respectful of your time, and on behalf of the MBA program and the center, we want to thank you for taking your time to share your wisdom to help us develop as leaders, especially in between coming from Disney, getting ready to move to Ireland, and juggling everything you're juggling. So thank you, and continue to lead the way.
All right. Well, thank you again, Pat, for the opportunity, and Lynn and Colleen, and Lucas and Oscar. for your questions. And, feel free if you want to follow up with me. Like I said, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm sure Lynn can definitely forward my details. I look forward to, your success as part of the Wake Forest program, but appreciate the opportunity.
Best wishes on your move.
All right,
Thank
thank
you, Patty.
you. Come to
Thank you,
Ireland.
Patty.
Thank
Good
you.
luck in Ireland.